I always wanted to be a surgeon.
Hello and welcome everyone. This has been a video that I've been excited to put together for the last few weeks. Disturbing movies was a niche of movie YouTube that really caught my interest a few years ago. It allowed me to get the gist of why an infamous movie I'd really heard of was so disturbing without having to sit through a potentially bad movie or one that would be really hard to get through, I suppose, just to get that one scene. And, you know, a lot of movies offer a lot more than that. But when I think of any genre or subgenre, disturbing movies is very similar to that vein because there's no one way to disturb. A lot along the lines of there's no one way to tell a gangster story, but some people may prefer Scorsese gangster movies. There's certainly some directors, their names are going to get thrown around quite a lot throughout this video that I definitely have developed a liking to, I guess, their styles as far as they disturb them. Some movies really rely heavily on this aspect, the aspect that you could say brought them to the dance, and will fall a bit flat outside of the disturbingness that they bring to the table. But some also delve into topics that we're really not well equipped to have in-depth discussions about as a society. So there's really two sides to the coin, where it could be exploitative at one end, but it also could bring to light some topics that are really worth exploring. That's the brilliance of disturbing movies. I mean, you have your cheap thrills, and you also have artistic merit. And I think a lot of disturbing movies, or at least the ones that I have prepared for this video, do have that. And I've actually rated every single movie on this list, barring one, positively. And not to spoil the inclusion, a lot of you who clicked on this having a bit of a background in disturbing movies will have heard and won't be surprised at all. The one is Human Centipede, and you know, that's for a whole other debate on how well done that movie was, and something that perhaps on a rewatch I would rate it positively as well. But every other movie I've rated positively. I either thought it was good to, you know, damn near a masterpiece. And obviously another disclaimer I just want to get ahead of is that a lot of movies are not going to be included. This is just so far. And there will potentially, most likely, be a lot more lists like this that kind of expand upon what I am laying the groundwork for here. But with all that being said, I hope you enjoy.
And here we go.
You know, breaking down movies into tiers, it's a brilliant idea. Because the individual rank, like, oh, this is the 50th, it's a bit arbitrary. But the tier itself, I think, is more meaningful. So as we progress tiers, I do think there is an ever so slight kind of change in the frequency or the intensity of how disturbing it is. I'm going to focus on a couple or a few films on each tier that I think are worth exploring, especially well done movies that you should look out for. And you know, some of them are potentially ones you have yet to see, or at least I hope so. But without further ado, the first movie is The Hunt, a movie that opens our minds to think deeply about childhood SA. And I'm going to use the acronym for that just because that can get pulled on YouTube. Even if there is no depiction and the claim is false, the pain that follows the accusation is all too real for the family of the child and the person accused. The very realistic approach to how a community would react is ultimately a premise that we can all let our imaginations run wild with. And Thomas Vinterberg, the director of this film, not only had the stones to tell the story, but also told it well. There is a in-depth episode on this movie. It's my Thomas Vinterberg episode. I encourage you to look at my videos if you would like a more in-depth analysis for The Hunt, and another movie that will also be appearing on this list. Bones and All, our next film, focuses on cannibalism and likely wouldn't have you lose too much sleep, but covers a subject matter that can churn stomachs. The film itself really is about the relationships of those afflicted and how troublesome they can be, along with connecting with people when you feel like an outsider. It's a really well done movie. It's powerful and maybe a little bit shocking for those not fond of blood. The next movie is Ricky-O, and this is truly a love letter to fans of martial arts / kung fu movies with some delightfully delicious over-the-top special effects, but plays it all with a very playful spirit. Even despite the fact there are depictions of brutal deaths and injuries, the special effects are campy and see-through enough for you as a fan to not be startled and feel like you're just a part of the fun. Definitely, it pushes the boundaries, but it has such a playful energy to it that, had a more grounded nature to it, it'd probably be a lot higher up. Paths of Glory has a grave injustice and a war crime for an ending, and it's definitely recommended just for any movie. Disturbing nature aside, it would be a movie I would recommend. It's not probably the Kubrick movie that you would be expecting, but for a disturbing list, but you grow emotionally attached to the characters, and that makes the awfulness of the ending, especially looking through the lens of this being a real possibility of what could have happened during the war, it makes it all the more impactful, is ultimately really good, and it gives you that kind of pit in the bottom of your stomach. Again, really, really recommend it for fans of war movies alike and Kubrick fans. The next movie up is Hellraiser 2022. I was really excited for this to drop on Hulu. It has brutality, but I can't rank it higher on this tier list because it does feel sanitized, especially in comparison to the original. From the film, the special effects done to depict the violence was really good, but the OG Hellraiser, I think, did it better. The new installment isn't a letdown, but it also doesn't surpass the original, even though it has a much larger budget and advanced technology. So, I mean, just from that standpoint, I feel like, it has to just be the top tier. Depending on the least disturbing tier. Now it is highlight time, and I'm going to highlight the movie Skinamarink, which has been getting a lot of attention recently, and Cachet, which can be handled almost together, as there are aspects of the movie itself and what is so disturbing about them that are quite similar. The long, unblinking stares into seemingly nothingness, in which we are searching for a shape or semblances of meaning, creates an atmosphere of unease in both of these movies. This atmosphere further builds into our paranoia that the characters involved are not safe and that danger is lurking around the corner. The slow, mounting pressure of suspense leads to a tremendous climax in which blood is spilled and us audience members are shocked. I'm keeping this purposefully vague because I would highly recommend both films, and I think Skinamarink definitely hasn't been seen by a ton of people, and Cachet probably hasn't been seen by a ton of people either. So I would think chances are you watching this may not have seen both of these films. Both films are also great ways to tie a bow on the climactic trauma we've experienced, as they are ambiguous enough to leave us wondering if the bloodshed is potentially just the beginning of the horrors that we witnessed throughout the film. This next tier, like the previous tier, is quite enjoyable but twisted. And when I say twisted, I say that because it takes reality, plays with it, and creates visuals and circumstances that feel outside the norm, despite how far or close it allows our minds to try and empathize with the characters involved, which leaves us vulnerable. The first movie, Mad God, is the brainchild of Phil Tippett and shows off wonderfully gruesome and gorish macabre of his daydreams through the medium of stop motion. It is delightful, I must add. This is up there among my favorite stop motion projects, with the likes of The Nightmare Before Christmas, and feels clearly aimed towards an older audience because of the nature of what is being depicted. While it is stop motion, which allows some mental protection from truly believing what's going on, the gore is thrilling nonetheless. The next film up is Titan. It's a really brilliant movie. It plays with a physical transformation to portray to the audience some of the feelings, emotions, and allows us to empathize with coming out or transitioning within queer culture. There's plenty of sexual situations which may make people feel uncomfortable, but also body horror, which is really some of the craziest, it holds some of the craziest scenes of this whole tier. Next up is a movie that, despite the themes being different, feels a little bit similar to Titan, and that is from one of the groundbreaking body horror directors in David Cronenberg, and it is his latest movie, Crimes of the Future, which plays on a dystopian future in which body modification is at its zenith to make commentary on the freedoms and even possibly of the movie industry, today's movie industry, and their attitudes towards gore. Quite fitting considering the subject matter we're discussing now. Ultimately, the frivolous nature of the characters involved is towards, and their feelings towards body modification strike a disturbing level because they seemingly feel no pain from the body modification, which turns things on its head. It gives a completely new perspective to something that would normally have us empathizing with the characters, but now almost feeling concerned for how far they're willing to take it because that limitation has been taken away. The third part of the night, our next movie, creates a nearly dreamlike existence to depict the paranoid and upside down world that existed thanks to Nazi occupation during World War II. Lives are in disarray, shown metaphorically in the world that they are living in, and the means by which survivors live during this time come together in an interesting film that is hard to do justice through just this brief description. Genuinely, Zulawski is a really creative director and makes this movie feel like a fever dream in which, in some sense, the value of human life is devalued. Cries and Whispers is one of the films I want to focus on a little more, as not only the lead actress's blood-curdling screams are disturbing in their own right, but so too is the depiction of the sisters of this main character, who are varying degrees of not bothered when it comes to their exhibition of, I guess, emotions concerning the death of their sister. The hardest pill to swallow is that truth that the film portrays is so believable that people are too self-involved to show the person who is dying, who has been, the dying person has shown such deep affection and is deeply affected both positively and negatively, any real concern. Ingmar Bergman, he is a master when it comes to psychology, and it allows him to be as impactful as any other movie on this tier without having nearly as much gore. And that is why I've made it the spotlight of this tier. Dipping a bit more into the popular and mainstream section, we have Trainspotting, a movie I love that shows a great depiction of the downfalls of heroin addiction, loss of both loved ones and shame whilst knee-deep in addiction. As opposed to some of the other entries that deal with substance abuse, this doesn't push it as far, but man, the infamous toilet bowl scene will stick with you. We have another entry from Thomas Vinterberg with The Celebration, which wrestles with the topic of child SA, and importantly, how this affects the family and the socio-economic factors that greatly impact how this subject matter is handled. While the topic is merely a catalyst to propel the plot forward, I found the attitudes of all involved to be believable and hard to stand idly by as a viewer as the actions progressed. Next, we have the OG Hellraiser, which was mentioned in the previous tier. It is one of the kings when it comes to low-budget yet effective gore special effects. Possibly one member of the Mount Rushmore of iconic horror villains. That's very debatable, but I guess mine would have to be Jason, Michael Myers, Freddy, and then a toss-up between Leatherface and Pinhead. This movie fully embraces its gore and creates the Cenobite, a group of interdimensional demons set on inflicting unimaginable pain on any soul unlucky enough to solve their box. With the entertainment while the entertainment and enjoyment do overshadow some of the disturbing nature, it's quite clear the premise is quite disturbing. Next, we have Zulawski making another entry on the list with Diabell, which shows bleak and gritty reality for soldiers coming back from home or from the war to home during this time period, and where your mind can take you when your life and reality have crumbled around you. Again, it's the second entry from Zulawski, who is able to create a landscape that is somewhere between reality and imagination, and depicts the devil and angel on your shoulder as beings who really follow you, with Diabelle's influence being sick and sinister. The next highlight of this tier goes to none other than Eraserhead. And despite the deeply subversive and memorable picks previously on this list, this is a film that I truly couldn't stop thinking about, and it has been months since I first saw it. The film is surreal, not a surprise for those of you who are familiar with David Lynch's direction. But what separates it from others is how deeply it made me feel during the movie, and especially after the movie was all said and done. The movie Eraserhead, at its core, deals with parenthood and, to make it even broader, responsibility. But Lynch is able to deeply embed a sense of dread in us and pervert this often beautifully depicted aspect of life, which is genius. The visuals are far removed from the real world, but yet it stuck with me very deeply. I hope you're enjoying this content, and if you are, be sure to like the video, comment your thoughts on the list, as well as the most disturbing film you have seen, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. I make videos like this, including my Andrei Tarkovsky first viewing ranked video, and have dozens of podcast episodes for those of you who would like a deep analysis on directors and movies. And many of the movies on this list have a podcast episode associated with them. So if you want a more deeper analysis, check out the videos I have. Chances are I've covered the movie you're looking for. All the top 5 movies on this list are on a podcast, so be sure to check those out. And most importantly, thank you for watching. This next tier has a combination of both the movies being played straight and grounded, a short film about killing, Room, Creep, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, to varying degrees of off-the-wall mayhem, The Cell, House of a Thousand Corpses, which makes me realize now that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is put into played straight, while House of a Thousand Corpses is off-the-wall mayhem. That's a discussion for a different time. But going further, Butterfly Effect, Possession, Inland Empire, and Hereditary. All that being said, this tier includes some of my favorite movies in Hereditary and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and all are deeply enjoyable while pushing forward the envelope quite far. Butterfly Effect is a movie that sticks with me for its depiction of childhood trauma years after the fact. One scene harkens back to me while placing a drunken father directing a movie between young Ashton Kutcher's character and the father's daughter, which is sickening, but there are tons of emotionally disturbing scenes, such as the death of a dog, which, if we're all being honest with each other, I mean, that always gets to me. And bleak scenes in which Kutcher's character is missing limbs and has no desire to live anymore. And quite honestly, many, many more. Possession, the last Zulawski entry on this list, is a genuinely disgusting surprise, and has scenes in which it seems like Isabelle Adjani, the lead actress, is genuinely in need of some help. If you haven't seen the movie scene I'm describing, it is maybe a couple minutes of Johnny just squirming and screaming in the hallway, or walkway rather, to a subway, which in and of itself is disgusting, but, you know, once you see it, it really sticks with you. And this all on top of a absolutely disgusting creature are all sure to make you feel something after your first viewing. The next movie, Inland Empire, is an absolute mind bending film that really captures the essence of losing sanity and also the themes of being taken advantage of, which will be a big theme later on this list. This is one that is arguable for its inclusion in this tier, but the abstract way the actress is being portrayed in this film feels like a ghost story at play of how dozens upon dozens of women were subject to power structures that left them vulnerable and silenced while being taken advantage of. The deep emotional resonance of the victims being betrayed is really effective, and altogether, that theme stuck with me quite a lot. The next film is The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is potentially or arguably one of the first zeniths mentioned in this list, and a film that helped along the American slashers, and definitely a film that can still shock even 5 years after its release. While it's surprisingly not very bloody, especially during memorable scenes such as the hook scene, the premise, the villain, and the opening are more than enough to solidify this movie's entry upon the list. House of 1000 Corpses is a movie that definitely takes a lot of inspiration from our former movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, while making the villains of this film uniquely its own. The violence and torture they commit is pretty dang extreme, as Zombie is always one to push the envelope. Up next, we have The Cell, which is a visually stunning look inside the mind of a serial killer that includes hard to watch scenes of child abuse, a horse being dissected, and a memorable shot of Vincent D'Onofrio costumed to look like an evil pope eviscerating a young Vince Vaughn. I had a scene from the mind of D'Onofrio being burned by the mother with a hot iron that you would use to iron shirts that has stuck with me since the first time I saw this movie years and years ago. Creep is a more grounded look at a modern serial killer. This film keeps the suspense throughout and has us audience members wondering if the antagonist is a real serial killer or not, and the reveal of what is what at the end is absolutely amazing. Room is a grim and bleak look at longtime kidnap victims that is played as realistic as a polished Hollywood movie can get. Much like Being Deep at Sea, what makes this movie is the implication. We have just enough information given to let us know how bleak a situation this is, and a very great portrayal of the struggles you would face after having been kidnapped for long term. The two spotlights of this tier are a short film about killing and Hereditary, of which both have a similar structure to them that make them easy to talk about together. A little less than halfway through Hereditary and halfway through a short film about killing, a shocking moment happens that turns the movie. With a short film about killing, there is a killing of a cabbie, and Hereditary, it is the spoiler alert. This is one of my favorite movies on the list, so be warned. The daughter character has her head knocked clean off. Now, both of these scenes had me feeling this type of worry for the afflicted, the man being brutally murdered, quite realistically, and the brother character from Hereditary realizing what just happened. These moments were some of the most powerful moments of any scene mentioned on the list so far, and both movies had endings that were able to follow it up with more, which is quite impressive given how viscerally impactful those two scenes were.
Go. You didn't kill her, Annie.
What? She isn't gone.
Private friends, private anxieties.
Yes, Peter?
Going to this party with your brother.
Oh shit, look. They're giving out chocolate cake. Hurry up, they're gonna run out. Come on.
Peter, it's hard to breathe.
Hereditary had, spoilers again, the mother cutting her own head off with a piano wire, a bit extreme, and the death sentence of a now convicted murderer from a short film about killing. Altogether, these films were able to have that extra oomph of impact that made them some of the most disturbing movies thus far. But the list goes on. For a lot of people's tastes, this is as far as you'll venture when it comes to disturbing movies. This is generally where the violent gore hits that level of manageable extreme that is generally the maximum that is allowed in Hollywood at a Hollywood level. And yes, Terrifier 1 and 2 has that in spades with their completely over-the-top special effects kills, all done at an indie level, not Hollywood level, but is still very impressive. Terrifier 1 and 2 show that they are willing to go a step too far to showcase brutality and over-the-top kills that border on comical for how outlandishly violent they are. Honestly, I've seen a lot of discussions online that some people think the films are so brutal they couldn't watch it. My girlfriend is an example of that. She couldn't get through the beginning of Terrifier 2. And the comical bit, now, I did not find that, but some people online have said that they thought they were so over the top that they were comical. All said, if you aren't into gore, it's going to be quite extreme for you. Sinister, the next movie, and spoilers for the entire premise of this movie, has the honor of depicting children creating home videos from their very own family annihilation thanks to the inspiration of a demon. I remember being very on the fence about this movie for a while after it came out, but was very pleasantly surprised after it came out because this movie pulls no punches. The videotapes were brutal and effective, which ultimately made it a very worthwhile entry into the horror genre. Midsummer is a more art house yet mainstream horror entry from the brilliant Ari Aster, in which I've controversially ranked higher than Hereditary, not only on this disturbing list, but also on my all-time horror movie rankings list. And the little extra amount of disturbing nature is partly the culprit as to why I feel this way. Aster has shown the ability to still shock audiences rather than use jump scares to manipulate them, which, for that alone, I love him. And this movie is filled with genuinely shocking scenes to where there is a good shot that at least one of them is going to land with you. For me, the cliff scene and the ending really stuck with me. Angst, aka schizophrenia, is a really gritty narrative about a prisoner who is released from prison, all from his perspective, and including his inner dialogue as the narration for the movie. For those of you fellow true crime junkies, it feels like a pseudo-telling of the Richard Chase story, or a day in the life of the man known as the Vampire of Sacramento, but set in Austria. For really hardcore true crime nerds, the crimes depicted are actually based upon the crimes of Werner Nitzek, that's a weird last name, and I pronounce that quite weird. Again, Werner Nitzek. Angst has little else to hide behind narratively, and would likely be too much for those who are not a hardened, gore, and disturbing film junkie, which is a bit similar to our next entry, I Stand Alone. Gaspar Noé is a bit of a provocateur within the movie industry, which is a nice way to say he pushes boundaries as far as he can just for the sake of doing so. I have no issues with this whatsoever, and quite like Noé, and look forward to watching more of his work. For those of you who are big fans of disturbing material, Noé is possibly a name you know well, and if that's not the case, it will be a name that pops up again and again in this video. I Stand Alone is a relatively modest showing from Noé, which is quite insane considering it displays child's essay, depictions of self-deletion, physical assault upon a pregnant woman in which there is assumed to be enough force to terminate said pregnancy. This film comes with a warning, a kind of Noé specialty at this stage of his career, and should be taken quite seriously by the faint of heart. Our next entry lands us upon Saw, one of the OGs when it comes to the newest installment of Hollywood gore, which is quite extreme and well done for its time, and definitely utilized its gore for notoriety's sake to help birth a series from its dastardly devices of torture, and was one of the first movies I'd heard referred to as torture porn. The infamous foot scene and bear trap are the main course of a film fraught with nasty appetizers of gore and torture, while utilizing psychological torture quite well. Next, we have Gaspar Noé stopping back in to toy with our psyches with Climax. Climax is arguably my favorite film by Noé, but ultimately doesn't make it any less disturbing, as Noé is able to showcase an acid-laced dance party that descends into utter chaos. Something that I will be saying again, but must be mentioned for the description of this film, is that Noé is able to depict hell unintentionally in a way that I fear may be accurate. The intensity and violent groupthink that plays out is both disturbing and terrifying, as you are privy to watch a situation that has gone completely out of control. The last two films I'd like to spotlight are both from the brainchild of Harmony Korine, and those films are Julian Donkey Boy and Kids.
Want you to scream. This is it. Come on, keep still. Don't shift around. Come on, be a man. Be a...
Freedom is the lie we live. No one cries enough. Waiting for the fire. Daddy never understood. Thought I was up and no good.
Yeah, but you fell. You see, you've got to raise up again and smoke the cigarette. And that's a proud man who smokes a cigarette like that.
Well, I don't smoke.
Yeah, you learn. Down. Raise your arm. Come on, come closer to me and don't be a coward. I don't want a coward in the family. Come here.
Julian Donkey Boy, much like its title, it's a unique movie as you will ever see. From its grainy depiction to Ewan Bremner's depiction of a man with schizophrenia. The movie quickly crosses the line of social norms, but its ending is so shocking, it solidifies its place on this listing. Finally, we have Kids, which is only written by Corinne and also cameoed by, but maintains its impactfulness as it covers the AIDS epidemic, social pressures, and the subculture of New York skater kids in the 1990s. This film is impactful, disturbing, and also one of my second favorites from the films covered on this tier. My second favorite of those mentioned on this tier. The main characters are the culprits of the actions that vary from uncomfortable to watch to quite shocking. Our second to last tier brings us to the point of no return. Films that possess a strong enough nature to them that once seen will ultimately numb you to some of the previous entries on this list. And I know statements like this sound very pretentious, but it should be mentioned that there is a point where you begin to be desensitized. This happens with a lot of action and war movies to where violence isn't nearly impactful unless the director or writer uses amplifiers to invoke certain emotions from the scene to make it more impactful. And that is exactly the case with disturbing movies as well. That much is true with all the entries, but this is less mainstream and also movies that people will actively avoid just because the subject matter is too extreme. With all that being said, we'll start with The Human Centipede, a non-surpriser to be on this list and also mentioned at the beginning of this video. It's a movie that feels specifically made to be on a list like this. If you've heard of this, you know exactly why it is disturbing. But for those who haven't a clue, it is about a mad scientist sewing three captives together in the least charitable manner possible, thus forming a human centipede. Next, we are doubling up with Eli Roth movies, Hostel and The Green Inferno. Roth is truly one of Hollywood's most infamous directors when it comes to both gore and torture porn, with Hostel putting him on the map for a lot of fans, including myself. His films were like the whiskey bottle in our parents' liquor cabinet. For me, as a youngster, it was a forbidden fruit that I was dying to discover and find out what all the hubbub was about. And even by today's standards, it does not disappoint. Hostel is really filled with the type of brutality and gore that I had never seen up until that point, and has some special effects that are genuinely sickening. Green Inferno is Roth's reimagination of an infamous gore fest called Cannibal Holocaust, a movie that is not included, that I have seen yet very far in the past and felt was on this list in spirit through Green Inferno's inclusion. And also I felt it might not be fair to try to put Cannibal Holocaust just because of how long ago I'd seen it. But it does right Green Inferno, that is, by its predecessor. There is a scene of human sacrifice very early on that is, or I guess fairly early on, which is incredibly brutal, that lets you know right away that this movie is pulling no punches. The house that Jack built is the tale of a serial killer that begins almost humorous and quirky only to ratchet up the intensity and further inject the bleak reality of the subject matter to a point where you are left gutted for the pain being experienced on behalf of the victims. The main character, Mr. Sophistication, is one that revels in the pain he inflicts on others and feels superior to most everyone around him. A couple very memorable scenes for how hard it is to watch is the escalation of a lover's quarrel and a family picnic, which ramp up and inflict psychological pain on the victims that made me feel deep sympathy for the helpless characters. Next, we have Requiem for a Dream, which is among one of the best PSAs I think imaginable against drug use. Its ending is one that I think really pushes the edge of the scale to where on one end you have a happy ending and on the other end you have a Requiem for a Dream ending. And that ending is still one that I can very clearly remember to this day. Up next, we have the prolific Takashi Miike and Park Chan-wook, hailing from Japan and South Korea respectively. Both movies play with the nature of relationships in a way that might make you a bit skeptical before going on a date with someone new. Audition has a tremendous ending sequence that will burn the words that the main antagonist repeats to the protagonist in your brain. The subversion of what you expect, the backstory of the antagonist, and the complete lack of guilt while grave bodily harm is being inflicted during the climax all come together to create a quite disturbing movie. Old Boy is a equally effective movie that really excels when we get to the last third. Not only does the main character commit an act of egregious self-harm, but we also find out two very disturbing secrets about integral characters in the movie that are really stomach-churning. The next pair I'd like to cover is Elephant and We Need to Talk About Kevin, which includes spoilers through this talk about the two, so if you haven't seen We Need to Talk About Kevin, please skip forward. Both movies cover the very subject taboo of school shootings. A bombshell that isn't dropped on us, and We Need to Talk About Kevin until the movie is nearly finished. But we have very different mythologies and angles on telling a story that deals with this subject matter. Elephant shows the school day nearly in its entirety, highlighting the banality as a great and real horror looms right around the corner. We Need to Talk About Kevin, on the other hand, shows the backlash for the remaining family as well as the build-up, which leads the viewers to ponder whether nature or nurture sent this little monster, Kevin, on his path of destruction. The last, and the one that I would like to pick, is The Passion of Joan of Arc. By far the oldest movie on this entire list. The silent movie depicts the trial and execution by fire of the famous French patron saint Joan of Arc. Maria Falconet puts on a memorable performance as she portrays the anguish of a person up against unwinnable odds in this movie. Never has a movie done more with histrionics or facial acting, for lack of a better term, and was the prime example of raw emotion becoming more disturbing than all the bells and whistles mentioned above. I highly recommend this movie despite its lack of color and dialogue, but know that it's one that will likely stick with you. Last but not least, we have our final five. The films that really stand on their own, and ones that I had trouble shaking after the movie faded to black. All of these films are good to great, but unmistakably disturbing and hard to watch, and certainly ones I have no intention of returning to, at least for a long time. Funny Games by Michelle Haneke is a critique upon Hollywood violence in which a group of young teens raised by media go on killing sprees by tying families up and psychologically torturing them before their demise. Their protagonist's utter lack of control is gut-wrenching at times and always effective. A lot of previous entries are far and away more gory, but the psychological torture on top of the complete lack of empathy and enjoyment on behalf of the villains make this a top choice for me. Next, we have Dogtooth, a film that depicts a family in which parents purposefully shelter their children from as much of the outside world as possible, which leads to a stunting of their emotional development and overall understanding of the world around them. The film becomes most uncomfortable once we truly begin to see how this has stunted them sexually and violently. Much like children, they have little understanding of many things we take for granted, and just as the sheltering is just as the sheltering is extreme, the utter lack of understanding indeed leads to extreme reactions from them in this scenario. Next up, we have a dandy of a documentary from the somewhat infamous director Lucifer Valentine. And while I haven't seen any of his other works, knowing this one and the titles of his others, I seemingly have enough knowledge to have a sense that he enjoys basking in the filth and also sensitive or taboo nature that he can find. Black Metal Veins, his documentary, covers a black metal band, very, very loose focus on the music, by the way, who is addicted to heroin, and their friends as their lives descend into utter chaos and death. For those of you who grew up much like me, Intervention was a very popular TV show growing up that I would watch from time to time that I thought would make the handling of this movie a little bit easier. But unlike the title of the TV show previously mentioned, there is no intervention whatsoever on behalf of Lucifer and the crew, even when it seemed medical attention or any interaction was absolutely needed. Amongst some uncomfortable sexual scenes shot, which seem wholly exploitative, the infamous scene, or to put it better, the scene that stuck with me the most, was of an overdose in which one of the women vomited blood during. Now, I'm not sure if she died during this scene, and it's unlikely that she did, but the scene was so shocking and followed up with an interview at a later date where the main subjects, or one of the main subjects we've been following, informs us that this person has died with no indication that the incident we saw was not the one who led to her death, all led me to feel this is one of the most intense movies or documentaries I'd ever seen. Needless to say, that creative editing was pretty gut-wrenching. Now that we're into the final two, we have two potentially landmark movies for the French New Extremity movement, a film movement much like the French New Wave movement, but catered for audiences that wanted to be shocked, grossed out, and disturbed by directors who want to push the envelope as far as it can go. The first movie I'd like to cover is Martyrs, 2008. I make the distinction because this is the only one I've seen, and the preferred option amongst those who have seen both, this and the American version. Martyrs starts out the first half like a ghost story, and the second half like a torture porn based around a secret society looking for a deeper religious meaning. People have argued the artistic merit of this film, and I stand on the side that this is much more than exploitation, and is worth watching for its plot and presentation, but will be upsetting and unwatchable for a lot of people. Not only does this show extreme gore, self-mutilation, torture, and violence, it is one of the bleakest movies I've seen, and also shows not only the banality of evil, but illustrates the lengths that people are willing to go for their convictions. I think a lot of people go into this expecting the most gory movie imaginable. That's not the case. While there is gore and the scenes with it are quite impactful, a scene of realistic and repetitive physical abuse played out day after day had just as much an effect on me than the gory scenes. Last but not least, as of now, and arguably the most disturbing movie I've seen, Irreversible, or Irreversible, by Gaspar Noé. I'll keep this short and sweet. The movie begins, and very quickly we are brought into what seems like a BDSM club, where, as only Gaspar Noé can, a seemingly hellish landscape is shown. But through the aggressive and quick movements and utter chaos taking place below us, as we sweep across the ceiling looking down at club goers below, it seems like we are traveling through hell. This alone is very disorienting and upsetting because of the explicit nature taking place below, but we then follow that up with an extremely violent encounter, in which leads to the murder of a gentleman by way of head smashing with a fire extinguisher. This is the appetizer to one of the hardest scenes in movie history. The focal point of the whole movie is the rape of a young lady in a hallway underpass that lasts 4 minutes and is as violent and brutal as it is sexually depraved. I will likely never watch this movie again, and this scene is exactly why. From here, the movie continues. There is no more gore or shock, but it all feels like salt in the wound, and as though Gaspar Noé is toying with the audiences after what we've seen. All of these films were able to touch a nerve with me to some extent, but this gave me the most physical reaction that I've ever felt watching a movie, and is not one I'm looking forward to top for a list like this for some time. As with all lists, there are bound to be entries excluded, and trust me, I know there are plenty of heavy hitters not touched upon. I hope to follow this up after I've had some time to watch more films of the disturbing ilk. Ultimately, I feel every film included has something that makes it worth watching beyond just the violence or gore, even if the points they are trying to make are more emboldened by the violence. Many filmmakers set out upon making their films with the intention to make their audience think or feel, and I felt a lot from the movies mentioned on this list. Let me know what film is most disturbing to you, and any films you think should be included in the next list. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out my other videos and podcasts. And I will catch you on the Flippity Floop. Bye, y'all.